All right, welcome everybody. As Tim said, my name is Darrin Kimbler. I am the agriculture educator up in Iron County, and I am the proud owner of many neglected old trees. I'm going to hop right in, and the first thing I get asked is, and what I ask people is, why do you want to rejuvenate your old trees, right? Because old trees are not as productive as younger trees, so and everybody has different reasoning behind it. It may be a family heirloom. Your great grandfather planted it when they settled the property or whatever, and you're wanting to bring it back. Or you're wanting healthier crops. You have an old tree that you either moved into moved to the place and it's there, or you've kind of let it go for a little bit. And you're wanting healthier crops and bigger crops of apples, and pruning and bringing it back is going to help you. That safety is always an issue too. If it's an older tree that's got a lot of dead branches, you want to make sure that you have a safe environment on your property. And finally, a lot of these old trees are not common varieties anymore, so you may have something that's not nearly as common and kind of special to the area or time. So those are some of the reasons people may want to bring their older apple trees back into production. So before you get out there and start cutting, you need to make some considerations and decide whether or not it is worth all of the effort to go out there and actually do it. The overall health of the tree is important. If 3/4 of the tree is damaged or dead, it may be more advisable to remove that tree and put in a new tree in that place, no matter how much you may want to keep the old tree. That goes back into the safety, as well as it's going to take a lot of work to get those back into shape. If there's large branches to remove and you don't have the capacity to do that, and you have to hire an arborist or something, that may be something you need to consider, because larger branches are more dangerous to remove than smaller branches. Changes in the landscape. That tree's been there for a while. The other trees around it may have grown up and shaded it. It may not be in an ideal place anymore because of the change in environment. A building's been put up close to it or something. So that's something to consider before starting to rehabilitate. The size class of the tree, and that's a little harder with some of the older ones. Is it a standard size? One of those nice tall trees for apple trees, a semi-dwarf or a dwarf. That's going to help you decide how to prune it and the eventual size of your tree when it's fully pruned. And finally, and I can't stress this enough, are there other apple trees around? Because apples are not self-fertile. So if they don't have a pollinator within a reasonable distance, you may have a beautiful tree that flowers but never produces apples when you're done pruning. So something to consider. If you don't have one close by, you definitely can still work on this tree, but you may want to look at planting a compatible pollinator tree nearby. And so, whoops, go back. Sorry there. And as you're thinking about it, yes, how much of the tree is damaged or dead? Is it fully shaded? And the other thing you need to consider, are you committed to annual maintenance? This is not a one and done process. And the actual, the process itself is going to take several years to accomplish if it is poorly overgrown. You can see in this picture here, I've got an old tree that's actually split into 3 separate trunks at the base. And one of those large branches have broken off. And so it's a question, is this tree even really worth saving? Or should it just be replaced? Because again, there's so much extensive damage to the tree and it is very old. Also, before you start to prune, you need to make sure you've got proper gear and tools for the job. A pruning or similar saw, crosscut saw or something like that, that's sharp. A pole saw is going to be handy, especially for maybe a standardized tree or the larger trees that, to prune out the top branches or leaders. A bypass lopper and hand pruners are going to be beneficial for those smaller branches, those little crossing branches where getting in there with a saw is quite cumbersome and you can spend a lot of time on it. And alcohol or some other disinfectant to disinfect your tools between cuts, because we don't want to be spreading disease from one tree to another or one branch to another. And on taller trees, you may need a ladder, a sturdy ladder, not necessarily an extension ladder, but a different type of ladder, a step ladder, something like that, and a buddy. You don't want to be climbing up, trying to cut branches that may fall different directions without somebody around to help steady that ladder, or just be able to watch and see what you're doing and maybe help out move around some of that stuff. The best time actually to prune is right now during the dormant season, because it does minimize some of those chances of spread of disease. Also, with the leaves off, you've got lighter branches to remove because you're not removing the weight of the leaves, and you can see the structure of the tree much better without all the leaves on. So right now is a great time between now and when the buds start to break on your apple trees. It's a good time to go out there and prune. So the first thing I recommend everybody do is go ahead and remove all the dead and diseased branches. And this can be done any time of the year because you're not really cutting into live tissue usually. If you're cutting off a dead branch at the trunk, you want to cut it back to where the callus is starting to form. By doing so, it's going to allow you to see the living structure of the tree much better, to make your sculpting cuts easier to determine. If you are taking something out that is potentially diseased, I'm giving fire blood as an infection as an example here. You want to cut back about at least 6 inches from any sign of the disease, because usually that disease is in healthy tissue or right below where you're seeing the dead stuff or dying stuff, and you may not be able to get enough margin to protect the rest of the tree or branch from it. And again, sanitize your cuts, sanitize your tools between cuts. And then stop and take a step back, right? Now that you've got all those dead branches out of the way, which make excellent smoking wood if you want to use that for your smoker, if you're one of those people. Otherwise, you can go ahead and dispose of them the way properly by however your municipality wants you to. But what you're going to do is you're going to step back and you're going to start to identify your cuts and how to bring this tree back into shape. Now that you've got that dead and diseased material out of there that's kind of clogging up the view, you're going to identify your central leader, and that is going to be sort of the tallest point on the tree. If you're thinking of a tree in a sort of a pyramid type structure, that's the way, the primary way apple trees are pruned. But if you have a very old tree that may not have a distinct central leader, you may be looking at more of an open type, sort of an umbrella shaped system. So you may not have a central leader to work with. You want to identify your scaffolding branches, and scaffolding branches are the ones that come off the tree at and provide the scaffolding for your fruiting branches, so that they're going to be stout, stiff, because they're going to bear a lot of weight during the bearing season, the apple fruit season. Look for any crossing or inwardly growing branches, because you're going to want to remove the weaker ones of those, or in all the inwardly growing branches, because they're not going to contribute any fruit, and they're going to actually cause problems with, say, disease, because you're not going to have good airflow into the canopy, and you're going to have poor ripening because of those internal branches. And look for any vertical growing branches or sprouts. Those are not particularly good for fruit. And again, they do cause a lot of problems as far as shading out your fruiting branches. So the first thing you're wanting to do is you're going to want to reduce the height by cutting back all the vertical branches beside your central leader. And that's going to help stabilize your tree. It's going to make it much less likely to split, because sometimes those co-dominant vertical branches have a very tight crotch area, and they're going to likely to split off. Should there be an ice storm or some other kind of event. And if you don't, like I said, you don't have a good candidate for a strong leader, you may be looking at sort of multiple leaders in sort of an open system where you're going to be pruning those interior branches between the various leaders. And you're going to want to make diagonal cuts on those vertical branches so that they will shed water. Don't make the cut straight across because water then can pool up there, and that's a great environment for disease. So your scaffolding branches, as I said, that's where you're going to have your fruit-bearing branches arise from. And your scaffolding branches should be attached to the trunk at a greater than 60-degree angle. Again, too narrow of a crotch and they're prone to split. If they're drooping down, they're going to be more likely to also break under the weight of the fruit. So you're looking at something between 60 and 90 degrees when it comes off of the trunk. If you have a very old tree that's not been pruned for a long time, you're going to be careful. You don't want to take off more than a third of the canopy in a single rehabilitation year. So you're going to, start with reducing the height and then take off maybe a third of the growth that to expose your scaffolding branches. And then the next year, a third and a third. This helps reduce the stress on the tree. It also helps reduce a lot of bushiness and extra sprouting of branches. So best thing to do is never cut more than a third of the canopy in a single rehabilitation year. So a reduction cut is where you actually cut back. It shortens the length of the stem or the tree by cutting back to a smaller limb. So you cut off the main branch back to where it meets up with a smaller limb, preferably one that's going off, more horizontally than vertically. As opposed to a removal cut, so you're thinning out your some branches, and you want to cut that back to the trunk or the parent branch and cut the smaller branch off in that case. And that doesn't reduce the overall height of the tree, but it does thin out the thickness of the branches. It's also important that when you are dealing with larger branches, and when I say larger branches, anything really over 2 inches, anything you can't really use a lopper on, you want to do proper cuts on it for safety and also to protect the tree from bark splintering and peeling. And so a good example of this is it's called the 3-cut system. And so your first cut is about 6 inches away from the trunk or branch that you're wanting to leave. And you're going to cut on the underside of the branch you want to remove about a quarter of the way through. And what that does is it provides a hinge to keep a gap so that the bark doesn't come peeling down when you make your second cut, which is to cut the branch completely off. And that should be a couple inches up from your first cut, as you see here in the diagram. And that if it is a large branch, you want to be careful. You want to make sure that you have good safety procedures there because it can be challenging. If it is larger than maybe 3 or 4 inches, you may want to consider hiring a professional arborist to actually do the trimming for you or the pruning for you, because they can get a lot more dangerous just by the weight of them as they get larger. And so finally, your third cut is going to be actually to trim off that stub, because the tree is going to heal much quicker without that stub. But we are going to talk a little bit about the usefulness of that stub. And the third cut is going to be along the root collar the branch collar of the tree. And you can see that it's sort of a bulge at the trunk of the tree, and you're going to cut just through that. And it's going to be somewhat of a diagonal cut, as you see here. The trees heal much quicker if you cut it along that root, that branch collar, as opposed to flush along the trunk, because you're cutting a lot more tissue away when you cut it straight down the trunk and flush. Now, if you are thinking you would like to regenerate a scaffolding branch or fruiting branch, then you would want to leave a little bit of a stub so that a branch, a bud could then be formed on that stub to be used as your regeneration branch. And so in that case, you would just clean off the branch at cut 1 from the top and have a nice smooth cut. It's also important not to use any kind of wound paint on your trees. There's very few cases where that is beneficial, and in most fruit trees, it is not beneficial. It delays the actually callousing and sealing of the wound. So please don't use any kind of wound paint to when you're pruning on your cuts. So your next step after you've kind of established your sort of more horizontal line branches, your scaffolding, and you've reduced some of the height, you're going to start to remove the crossing branches and the shaded branches. And you can see in this picture here an unpruned and a partially pruned tree where they've taken out a lot of those shaded branches, those lower branches that are hanging down. That's not going to provide good fruit, and then they're going to drag on the ground when they're weighted with fruit. The shaded branches and the cross branches are going to cause structural issues and disease issues. So go ahead and just start removing those smaller shaded branches and crossed branches. And that's going to be good for thinning it out. You can see here we're removing one of those inwardly growing branches that's starting to cross there. The next thing you're going to be doing is you're going to be removing water sprouts and root suckers. And these are these vertical branches. They usually come up from your pruning wounds, and they come up and they grow very quickly during the growing season. They don't really contribute much for the tree, and so it's good to go ahead and prune those out. And you just get them out of there. That's going to open up the canopy more. The tree's going to put more energy into your fruiting branches and your fruit itself. And then finally, what you're going to do is when you've got all of those undesirable branches, your branches that you have left are going to be your fruiting branches. And again, you're going to want to thin out those to allow more light into the canopy. So those branches tend to be at the very tip of the fruiting branches or the scaffolding branches. And there you're just going to go in and take out any of those sort of inwardly facing branches even there. These are going to be fairly small. This is where a good hand pruner comes in, because these are usually typically small branches, and so great for opening up the canopy. And it's important that you got to understand that after the 2 to 3 years that it may take to get this into final shape, you're not done yet. You need to prune out those water sprouts several times because they will grow very rapidly. And then you want to do a good cleanup of them during the dormant season when you're doing the rest of your pruning. You want to also take care of any diseased or damaged branches as needed. You don't want to leave those diseased branches up there. And I can't stress it enough, especially during the growing season, to sanitize your tools between cuts. You also, annually, you're going to continue to thin the tips of the branches so that you maintain good air circulation and light on the tree. You're going to look at rejuvenation cuts, like I said, to maybe replace a scaffolding branch that was broken or got shaded or something like that. And it's important also to maintain good health for your fruit and your trees is to clean up the leaves and excess fruit every season so that diseases and insects, pests do not have a safe harbor to reinfect and reinfest your trees. And that is where we are. It's a fairly short, and there's not a lot of detail there, but there will be resources in the chat to get you to some more detailed literature and resources there. Okay, I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you, Darrin. A lot of good information there. I'll remind folks, we will be dropping a survey at the end of this or in the chat. If you could respond to our survey and give us a little feedback on today's presentation, that would be great. You can also find additional resources on our website with the Ask a Gardening question if we don't get to all the questions today, as well as reaching out to your local horticulturalist extension office. Okay, Darrin, we got lots of good questions here. One that seems to be a repeat theme here is, can the water sprouts be used, replanted, or grafted?
Um, they possibly could. Again, I would, this is a little bit further out of field there, but getting proper root stock for these scions, and I don't think they would be the best for maybe grafting. I would grab a fruiting branch to actually do the grafting to. They're just a very rapid growth. They tend to be fairly weak. I would say the best thing to do is just dispose of them properly, and not try to utilize them. They make, dried down, they make nice kindling or smoking if you're just doing a little smoking.
Another repeat theme here is concerning cedar trees. Seems like there's several questions here about cedar trees and location to their apple trees concerning cedar apple rust. Can you address that?
Sure. Yes. So yes, there's a whole range of gymnosporangium rust diseases out there. There's several of them that will affect apple trees. They all are their alternate host is juniper or red cedar. Some people will call it. And the best thing to do is actually make sure there's good spacing, but also it's better to prune out the galls that form on the cedars in the spring before they have an opportunity to produce their spores. But cedar apple rust is not usually that deadly to apples. It's a cosmetic disease for most apple trees, especially larger trees. So it's something that you may want to live with. You may want to just make sure that you've got good distance between them. But it wouldn't be a disease that I would worry about as far as killing the apple tree, like fire blight or some of the other more serious diseases. Good question.
Okay. Let's see here. There's several questions here too, addressing how people determine the variety of the tree. Is there a good way to determine the variety of your apple trees?
I've not found a great source for that. There's so many so many varieties out there, especially on older trees. We're in a modern age, you're only going to find a handful at your local nursery, but depending on the age of the trees that I have in my yard are 80 to 90 years old. I can only identify one of them. That's a yellow transparent. The others, I couldn't identify. There are experts out there, but I don't have a resource really for it.
Yeah, what I have learned, Darrin, because I've gotten this question in the office a couple times, is that there are folks out there that will do genetic testing on your apples, but at this point, the process is so cost prohibitive that it's really not useful for the average homeowner. If you're running an orchard, it might be something to look into, and you can contact your local office and they can point you in the right direction. Is there another kind of recurring theme here, Darrin? Is there a way to prevent or prohibit those water sprouts after they've been trimmed?
There's not an easy way. The best thing to do is just maintain pruning. And when they're small and they're fresh, that's the best time to do it. So, as you're walking by, maybe have your hand pruners in one hand and your little bottle of alcohol in the other, and just take them out as they're coming up. If you wait till the end of the season, some of them are going to be, almost thumb size in diameter, and you're going to have to use maybe the bigger loppers to get those. But having good cuts and not cutting too much off the trunk and canopy of the tree helps minimize the number of water sprouts you get. You're not going to eliminate them all, but if you don't take off too much, the tree doesn't think it's in serious danger and it won't produce as many water sprouts. And if you have a proper branch cut and don't leave a stub, the calluses will help eventually stop those sprouts from happening. Those sprouts don't pop up spontaneously. Those are sprouts that have been buried over the years by woody growth, and then they're stimulated to sprout.
Great information. So concerning the pruning, Darrin, there's a question here. Is the alcohol necessary if you haven't used your tools on other plants or trees?
It's a good idea especially anytime during the growing season, because you don't want to transfer disease, and you won't be able to necessarily disease organisms, and you don't necessarily want to transfer that within the tree itself. So if you make a cut on a branch that was diseased, it may not be symptomatic yet, and you go and cut another one, you've created an open wound that is, very susceptible to disease. So it's a good idea to use a disinfectant. I prefer alcohol because it's not as caustic as bleach, but a 20% bleach solution will work. There are some spray disinfectants that make it a little easier if you've got a lot of small branches. You don't need to necessarily do it with dead branches because those are dead. Usually by the time they're dead, there is no more disease organism in them. And as long as you're not cutting into living tissue when you're removing those, you're a little less susceptible. And then, of course, dormant pruning, when the disease organisms are not active, and by the time they are active, the exposed wound is starting to dry out and not be a good hospitable site for infection. So get out there in the next couple of weeks and do it.
Right. Do it while it's cold. The next question I have here is the information you're sharing with us today concerning apple trees. Does that also apply to crabapple trees?
It does. I mean, you have different, a lot of people will have different desires for their crabapple trees. They may want a more full canopy for the flowers and the blossoms as much for the fruit. But you still want to help minimize disease and everything else. You still want to open up that canopy to get airflow and to get good light on those fruiting or flowering branches. And you want to get, obviously get the dead wood and the water sprouts out of them anyway. So yes, it does apply.
Great.
As well as to pears. If you have an old pear tree, this works really well. Pears and apples, really use the similar system for maintenance.
Right. Another question that's sort of a repeat theme here is, do you have a recommendation on spacing for your apple trees for proper pollination?
Spacing, there's two types of spacing for pollination. There's the physical separation, right? And then there's also the temporal spacing too. You want to make sure that your pollinator is also flowering at the same time as your crop tree, your fruit tree, right? Because you need to have both of them flowering at the same time. So first thing you want to do is make sure they're compatible in flowering. A lot of times, if you know the variety of your tree, there's good references on good pollinators, good companions to it. Spacing, they're insect pollinated. So usually bees, there are some hummingbirds and so forth. So the distance can be, up to, 100 yards in some cases and still get good pollination, because those bees are going to travel quite well and quite far a lot of times, especially in the spring when the apple blossoms are out. There's not a lot of other sources for them.
Great information. And did you notice anything that I might have overlooked?
Well, we're running out of time, but a couple people had made a question specifically about pollinators. If you could just explain a little bit about, you talk about enough for pollinators. If you could just kind of just wrap that up a little bit about pollinators, what you're looking for, the spacing. I know we're just tight on time, but I noticed quite a few questions on pollinators.
Right. I find that with apple trees in particular, because they're very early in the season, most of their pollinators are the wild bees, the really small bees that you don't really see. There's quite a few bumblebees, and if somebody's got honeybees in the area, then they'll also to it. Making sure that you have good pruning and you good health, and you're not, is going to be paramount to having a good flower crop, right? And it's important also with pruning so that you don't have alternating years, especially with older trees. You'll have alternating years of flowers and no flowers if they're unpruned. By pruning them, you'll have more annual flowering, and you're going to be able to get a better source for pollinators. Spacing, again, bees are pretty strong flyers, so it's not as critical. If you've got one in your yard and one in your neighbor's yard, 100 yards away, that's adequate as far as spacing. I hope I answered that question. I'm not sure.
Well, Darrin, I think that's about all we have time for today. We're a little over time. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you everyone for joining us. Again, if you could please check out that survey in the chat and help us out with that, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.